Hi everybody, welcome back to our Bible study through 1 Kings. Today we are in chapter 9, a little bit shorter than the last couple chapters. So let's talk about when these events happened. We're still talking about the reign of Solomon, who was David's son. This chapter specifically talks about events that happened in the middle years of his reign after he spent 20 years building the temple and the king's house. Solomon reigned for 40 years from approximately 1015 to 975 BC. Our main characters in this chapter is Solomon. He's the third king of Israel and Judah. We're also going to talk about Hiram. Now, this is not Hiram the metal worker who did work on the temple. This is the other Hiram who we talked about before, Hiram the king of Tyre. He provided Solomon with wood from the forests of Lebanon to build the temple and the king's house, and he was always a longtime ally of David's and of Solomon's. And then Pharaoh's daughter. She was given to Solomon in marriage as part of an alliance between the Egyptians and the Israelites. Now, as far as our map today, we are going to talk about, of course, Jerusalem. That's where the temple and Solomon's house or palace were built. Solomon gave Hiram several cities near the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is, you follow the Jordan River all the way north, you run into the Sea of Galilee. A couple places are not on the map today, and one of those would be Ezion-Geber. Solomon built ships there. Now, this was about 200 to 250 miles south of Jerusalem on the fork of the Red Sea. So you're going to need a little bit bigger map to get all of that in there. And then you'll need an even bigger map to see Ophir or Ophir. Now, you might not even, you're not going to find that on any map because no one knows exactly where it was. It's mentioned in verse 28, and it's likely the name of a region rather than a city. But the location has been debated for years and years, and there's still no consensus on it. Theories propose Arabia, India, Africa, and some even the Philippines. Now we can go over to our outline. Our first section, verses 1 through 9, God appears to Solomon a second time. So after the king's house and the temple were built, God appeared to Solomon a second time. Do you remember where Solomon was the first time God appeared to him? He was in Gibeon, and that was the time when God appeared, and he gave Solomon an option. He said, what would you like from me? And Solomon asked for wisdom, and so God made Solomon wise. So that was the first time. This is now the second time. God was very pleased with the temple that had been built, as we saw in the last chapter, but he was primarily interested in the heart and the devotion of Solomon and his people. God told Solomon that he would establish him and his descendants as kings in Israel if Solomon would give his whole heart to the Lord, as David had done. However, if Solomon and the people turned away from the Lord, God promised to, quote, cut off Israel from the promised land and to turn the temple into a heap of ruins. So God said, yes, the temple's nice, temple's great, but that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is your devotion, your obedience to me. We'll talk about that more in our application section. If this happened, if the temple was ruined by these foreign nations that God allowed to come in and judge his people for their wickedness, then it would be a clear sign to all the nations in the world that Israel had turned away from God after God's great blessing had been given to them during the time of David and Solomon. The second part of the chapter is kind of like the miscellaneous section. I don't know. I've just got it titled Additional Details About Solomon's Reign, verses 10 through 28. So after building the temple and the king's house for 20 years, Solomon gifted Hiram, the king of Tyre, with 20 cities in the area of Galilee, near the Sea of Galilee. Now, for a reason that isn't specified, the text tells us that Hiram wasn't particularly pleased with this gift. Maybe the cities weren't all that impressive. Maybe Hiram thought, after all he had done for Solomon, he should have got something more than this. We just aren't told. However, we are told that Hiram still sent Solomon 120 talents of gold. A talent's about 75 pounds or 34 kilograms, so that's a lot of gold. We're also told that Solomon drafted all the Canaanites to do forced labor. These were the non-Israelite people who the Israelites failed to drive out during the conquest of the Promised Land. You remember Joshua and the Israelites were supposed to come in, drive out all of the people, the pagans who lived in the Promised Land, and they were supposed to take possession of it. Well, they didn't do that. They didn't get rid of all of the people. So some of those Canaanites remained in the land living amongst them. Here, Solomon drafts them to do his work. They built the wall of Jerusalem, the Millo, which most people think was like a fortification, maybe like a tower or a turret on the wall of Jerusalem, the cities of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. We're also told that Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which was way down south, 200 miles on the fork of the Red Sea. I believe it's the Gulf of Aqaba. And then his servants went on voyages to this mysterious land called Ophir, or Ophir, and they brought back 420 talents of gold. So wherever this Ophir place was, it was held a lot of treasures. So there you go. That is 1 Kings chapter 9. Now let's talk about our application. Let's turn to this idea. God is less interested in your achievements than in your heart. We see that with Solomon and the temple. God said the temple is nice, but more interested in your devotion to me. So God is less interested in your achievements than your heart. As we'll see in upcoming books of the Bible, and this is a bit of a spoiler if you don't want to know what happens. I've probably already spoiled this in some previous study, but you can stop the video here. But as we'll see in the upcoming books of the Bible, God didn't hesitate to tear down the temple, to ruin the temple when his people turned away from him. God doesn't want glory from edifices built and maintained by hypocrites. And that includes religious edifices, church buildings, ministries, doing things in the name of the Lord when your heart isn't in it. God will be honored in your achievements when your heart belongs to him. It's better to have fewer achievements with a godly heart than to have a, quote, great spiritual resume with a heart that's adrift from the Lord.